Viva Las Vegas! Viva Las Vegas! Viva! Viva Las Vegas! And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Holy Hardwood podcast with Pat and Tony. So, Tony, Vegas, what are we thinking?
Welcome, Pat. Vegas, such a glorious place. Really excited for this team to get the opportunity to show once again another game in Vegas what this team can be ultimately as we see this team grow together with everybody being healthy. But can't say enough of how they fought in a tough environment against the Sacramento Kings. So really excited for this opportunity that the team can get.
Yeah, for sure. One, just the opportunity that they get to have as a team to go ahead and go down to Sin City, right, and spend some time and grow as a even stronger group, grow that camaraderie and build that chemistry as everybody's kind of rounding back into form and being healthy. I think that's a great opportunity. I think the big question is you know, do you think they're staying at Caesar's Palace, or are we thinking they're maybe somewhere else?
Well, Pat, I think they're probably staying somewhere else, but I think if they wanted the best time that they could have, uh, that's probably where they would go. Maybe, hopefully, potentially, if they can get to Saturday night and pull off a victory there, then they'll be in Caesar's Palace.
Yeah, that's always when I think of Vegas, that's the main thing I always think about, right? A place like Caesar's Palace, it was like, did Caesar actually live there? Um, or is that just, a fairy tale? So hopefully the Pels are there staying and can hopefully answer that question for us and maybe give us a little bit of feedback. But most importantly, I think they're there to win two more games. And like you said, and even, what Zion and Brandon said today in their interviews were, um, they certainly were excited for the opportunity. And if they happen to win the thing, that they're going to celebrate accordingly. So, big opportunity, big chance, but I think a lot needs to be said for just putting themselves in a situation to have a chance at it. All things considered, and I think that in itself is a big accomplishment.
Yeah, no doubt about it, Pat. I mean, you speak on kind of what Brandon and Zion said in their interviews earlier today. And yeah, there's a lot of jokes and everything, but you can really see that bond forming between those two guys. And yes, like Brandon said, they're a team that likes to have fun, goof around on and off the floor. I think that really pays dividends in the long run um, to have such a close team. And I think this is a great opportunity to go through these battles and go through these wars together on this court in this stage. And, at this point, they're kind of playing with house money. And, most people probably didn't pick the Pelicans to even beat Sacramento, but now that they're in this moment, I think they kind of have the chip on their shoulder. It was a slight comment by, Zion and Bi basically not being on TV and them saying that their teammates uh, like that challenge and love when the bright lights are on. So, again, very excited for the opportunity that they have, and really liking that bond that's forming between those two guys.
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of what you're saying there, and I think the big thing is, this team sounds like they just wanted to have a chance, right? They wanted to get themselves here, give themselves an opportunity, and ultimately, no pun intended, but bet on themselves, right? They feel like if they're healthy and playing the right way and are given the opportunity, I'm sure they feel they can beat any team in the league, or especially any team that's there present in Vegas, right? Um, Certainly no slight to those teams. It's certainly a strong field, a lot of different teams and different groups of players there for this central Final Four, right? But um, I like the team's chances. But before we go ahead and dive into that matchup with the Lakers tomorrow night, obviously one everybody's going to be very excited about. It's going to be a fun game. Why don't you take us back and maybe give us a little bit of your feedback and walk us through what you saw in that big win against the Kings.
No doubt, Pat. Like we kind of discussed on the pods previous and just talking one on one, you know, off script, we knew it was going to be a tough environment. Uh, we knew we probably were going to get punched in the mouth a little bit, and that's what the Sacramento Kings did. They fed off of that energy, and even going off of the first in season tournament game where you saw Indiana's crowd and their bench going crazy, and this was no normal game by any means for these teams involved the other night. And, it wasn't the best of starts for us. And maybe we were a little more too juiced up at the beginning, but you really saw that when the bench came in, the script flipped a little bit, and that energy from Jose and Trey getting it going a little bit, and Najee as well. um, once they came in there, they kind of flipped it over, and we made a run at the end of the first, and we kind of never looked back from there. And you love what you see from Bi when the stage is high and everything like that. And I think everybody that came in contributed what they did, and ultimately it was a great team win, and showed us that this team could get knocked in the mouth early and figure it out in a hostile environment. So I don't really have those questions moving forward. I kind of knew that going back to 2 years ago when they played the Phoenix Suns. There's a lot of dudes that are just really tough. A Herb Jones, a Jose Alvarado. The list goes on and on. Najee Marshall, like they're not going to be messed with. They're not going to be punked. And I like my chances up against any team at the end of the night. Talent wise and just toughness wise. And I think ultimately that was the change in the game. I think we were a little more physical, a little more tougher, and then we ended up hitting free throws and doing all the necessary things in the end to get that victory over the Kings.
Yeah, I saw a lot of the same things. I think the big things is, like you said, playing with that toughness. I even heard a lot of other, um, platforms or networks or whatever you want to say. That was something that other people had stated, right? That they found was, surprising to some if they don't follow the team as closely as others. But other folks had mentioned that this is a team that does play with an edge, right? It was mentioned that they don't really fear anybody, and I think that's something that you can take back to even matchups in the past years where we've always said this team gets up for big games and doesn't really back down from big matchups or high level top tier talent, facing them on a night in, night out basis. That's really when they rise and play their best, brand of basketball. So I certainly agree that, yeah, they did play with a level of an intensity and physicality, but it was even a little bit more of a step further, right? I mean, you can do a lot of those things by just how you play in terms of like intangibles, right? Like you always know a guy like Najee and Herb are going to play with an edge in terms of defending and getting on loose balls, and they do the little things, But I felt like I saw a little bit of like that even went to another level, right? There was like an extra step or like a maturation in the idea of how they're going to play physical, right? They like Coach James Borrego had mentioned before, I really felt like outside of that first 6 minutes, once they've kind of settled down and allowed the Kings to kind of go on their run, you know, you saw them really playing with a level of violence, right? That he even had called out in some of those previous games, that we were able to, take a sneak peek in the locker room, and that was something that really always stuck to me. Is that's something that you don't always hear from, especially in basketball terms, right? You might hear that in other sports or other arenas, right? Playing with violence, but that was something that I picked up on. You saw shades of guys doing things that are a little bit outside of their normal characteristics, but these were positives, right? A guy like Herb, who's really at this point looks like he really is expanding his offensive game and is rounding into being there'll always be a defensive minded guy, right? That's where he makes his money. That's where his highest value is. But he's turning himself into a two-way player that needs to be respected on the offensive end. And I'm seeing a different level from him in terms of like the level of violence he's playing at, whether that's in transition or in the half court when the floor is, um, off balance and he has an opportunity to drive the rim, and even looking later in that game, just the way that he took that ball coast to coast. And at that point in the game, could have very easily, dumped it off to somebody or kicked it out or even just laid it up. But I mean, he had a purpose that he was driving to that rim. He wanted to send a message, when he went up there and played above the rim and ultimately had that tough finish. He it seemed like he wants to be felt. He wants people to realize that he's coming in there on a mission to get to the basket, and nobody can stop him from getting to the basket. Um, and that was something that in a different way I also saw from Bi. Right, we've always known that Bi has exceptional shooting splits and statistics when you look at his games, whether that being play-in games, his small sample size of that playoff series against Phoenix, this in-season tournament play-in games essentially, as well as that qualifying game against the Kings. I think you ran the numbers for me, and he's averaging somewhere around 27 and a half points and 6.5 assists and 6.5 rebounds. So there's clearly an uptick in his um, performances and his ability to impact the game. But it also appears to me that he flips a switch almost in his mentality, right? And it's almost like that's the true version of Brandon, and that's where he wants to play, and that's the way that he wants to operate is being physical, not allowing anybody to stop him from getting to his spots, crashing the glass, you really using his length to deter shots and to chase down long rebounds and end possessions and making those tough plays. I often wonder after seeing that, is it like he knows that he's capable of clicking into that mindset and taking his game to that place really at any time whenever it's needed, and maybe he, and for his own well-being, right? Maybe with making sure trying to stay healthy and making sure he's available to this team. Maybe he has to take it back a gear, right? Maybe he has to play in low gear throughout an 82 game schedule, which is still basketball at a high level, but I don't think it's a coincidence that you're seeing that, time in and time out when he needs to elevate his game, not only from a production standpoint, but a physicality and, you know, athletic ability. It seems like he's going to another level in these big games, which is super exciting as a Pels fan because when he does that, that coupled with his incredible skill level and his basketball IQ and his feel and his ability to play make for others, it really puts him in a whole nother level, right? I mean, I think it's pretty safe to assume that, a healthy Brandon during the regular season is going to be around a 24, 25 point a game guy, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, which is a very high end player, right? A player that on a successful team should be a year in, year out all star. But when he's able to take it to that next level, uh, especially like I said, from a physical standpoint, he really starts setting himself um, aside from some of those other guys that he's coupled up with, right? That version of Brandon looks like a top 15 player in the league in my eyes. That looks like a 1A, 1B kind of player on the right team, not a number 2 or a number 3 that for some reason some people have argued, right? So I think the more and more we're able to allow him to play in these situations, in these environments, in these games that are super high stakes, right? I mean, remember, this is a guy that in high school, right, in a tough basketball state, right? Coming from North Carolina, which is a state that's often well regarded and respected in terms of high school basketball. I mean, this guy was a four-time state champion, and regardless of how good you are or how good the people are that are playing around you, it takes a special breed of guy. And teammates to stay locked in and to compete at that level against the players that they are in that state and to deliver, four straight state titles. So I mean, I think you know that that's ingrained in him, and it's taken him a little bit longer than others coming into the league to ultimately be put in that position, right? Based on being drafted to a rebuilding team in Los Angeles and dealing with some injuries and coaching changes, and then ultimately finding his way to a young and rebuilding team in New Orleans, right? I think we're finally seeing him being put in a position, one because of his growth and development in his game, but also having a running mate like a Zion and a CJ, and having really, really strong supporting pieces and cast members that fit his game, that this truly feels like the first time in in my mind, right, that maybe he looks at his group and says, there's no reason I can't get to this playoff. Um, portion of the year and make a strong run. And in his mind, I would imagine he looks up and down the league and says, if I have this team and we're healthy, there's nobody that can stop me and there's nobody that can keep me from getting my team over the top. So I think that that's an incredibly exciting opportunity in front of himself and this team, especially looking forward if they can find a way to continue to keep growing and getting into the playoffs. That should ultimately raise the ceiling for not only the Pelicans organization, but this fan base for what they really see in a guy like Bi. I think that his game is going to be something that grows and continues to evolve at a higher level as these games get harder and harder, and you're really going to see the true value out of a guy like Brandon Ingram.
No doubt about it, Pat. I mean, we've talked about it, countless times, hours and hours, dating back for years now. I mean, Brandon Ingram's game is the perfect, in-game playoff shot maker, shot creator, all those intangibles that you love in a guy. I mean, you can't look at that game against the Kings and say, "Oh yeah, that was just a regular game." Like it looked like it. It felt like it. It was, ref officiated like that. The crowd was into it, and you saw what kind of got Bi going that first half or that first quarter is, he made that tough, mid range pull up and in someone's face and stuff like that. And you even heard like a Stan Van Gundy comment about that. It's like, oh well, that's a playoff shot. And how many countless times did he say that during the night? Um, I think he's got that huge confidence in those types of moves, in those shots. And like you're saying, I'm sure in an 82 game season, he's not wanting to beat his body up. And we know he's probably capable of going and attacking the rim. But, there's comments of, oh, well, he's playing bully ball tonight. I mean, he truly just looked like a man who was on a mission. And you can always tell when he's aggressive rebounding wise, too. That's a big thing with him. When you see him crashing either the offensive glass or the defensive glass, going up, getting big rebounds on people, as well as he basically in these playoff games, in season tournament games, playing games, so on and so forth, averages probably around 8 or 8.5 free throw attempts per game, where in the regular season so far this year or in years past, he probably averages around 4 or 5. So you just see the aggressiveness in him attacking the rim, like you said, and it's always a good sign. And you're glad to have a guy who can make those shots and has that mentality. And I truly believe, like you're saying, he looks down the bench or to his other guys and says, this guy cares, this guy puts in the work. you know, they're all kind of at that right age or experience in their careers where they're all kind of meshing together, where it's like they're not too young, they're not old by any stretch, and they all kind of have like a little bit of experience and probably feel that the league or other people have passed them by, them making that note again about not being on national TV. And so, hey, why not go out there and play your hardest and show who you are, and kind of show the league, like, hey, we're here. Not many of you might see us on a night to night basis, but we're as good as any team in this league when we're healthy and we get this chemistry right.
Yeah, that's very well said. All really good points. I mean, you know, taking one more, we won't stick on this for too long, but one other thing that I feel like is important to mention for a guy like Bi when you look at this is not only has he been, a great player for New Orleans and has given them the best opportunity to win in these games, albeit no matter the situation, right? There's been situations where he's been in this situation at the end of the year or in playoffs, and we have been healthy and we haven't been healthy. Like he's dealt with both sides of it, but regardless, at least in my recent history, I can't think of one of those games, whether it being the play-in games, um, the last 2 years, or these tournament games, or the other night against Sacramento, or that 6 game playoff series against Phoenix. I mean, every night that it feels like he's lacing it up, um, in one of these big games or in one of these big series, I feel like not only myself, but the national consensus is he's been the best player on the floor in every one of those games. He has taken his game to a whole nother level to the point that he was playing in a series against Phoenix with a lot of really high level players, right? Chris Paul, DeAndre Ayton, Devin Booker for spurts here and there, Mikal Bridges. I mean, a lot of really high end, highly regarded players in this league, and pretty much everybody's consensus was Brandon Ingram was the best player on the floor tonight, and it wasn't close. Like he was heads, he was well above anybody else on the floor. Right, these tournament games, he was incredible in all of them. The game against Sacramento, you have a guy coming in to that game essentially averaging 30 points a night, a guy that people are pushing to be in the MVP conversation, and he pretty easily outplayed De'Aaron Fox. I mean, I don't think you could look at those two games and really put themselves in the same class in terms of on that night, right? He was another level above De'Aaron, right? And I think that's something that you have to keep in mind, right? Is there's a lot of guys that can put up a lot of numbers on a night in night out basis when you're going through the run of the mill schedule, and not to slight De'Aaron at all, right? De'Aaron's a fantastic player, super important to their program over there, but at some point there are some physical limitations that make it harder for guys at that time of the year to be as impactful as they are in the regular season, right? And we've seen a lot of guys that have fallen under that umbrella, right? Where they're incredibly effective and efficient and impactful during the regular season, but when that switch flips to the playoffs, you suddenly see a downturn in impact or efficiency, or they struggle to play at the same level. Where Brandon is the exact opposite, right? I mean, his game is tailor made for the playoffs, right? His size, his length, his versatility, everything is built to be an impactful postseason player when these games matter, right? When I think of a offensive player or a cornerstone piece of a franchise that has aspirations to contend at the highest level and compete for championships over a couple year stretch, right? There's three main characteristics that I look for, in an offensive engine, you might say, right? A guy that's going to be the central cog of that offense. And those three things Brandon really fits very well in. One is the ability that he's able to not only go on mini runs by himself, right? You'll see Brandon go on quite a few 6 to 8-0 runs by himself, right? To maybe nudge his team ahead and give them a little bit of separating distance when it comes down to that last 4 or 5 minutes. But most importantly, his offensive game allows him to stop the bleeding during those inevitable runs that other high caliber teams are going to go on, right? You have the ability to put the ball in his hands, and regardless of what you think in terms of what the best shot on the floor is, or what the data might say, or what the analytics tell you, it's going to be a good look, which is very hard to come by at that time of the year. You're playing against the best coached, the best versions of teams rosters, the best collection of talent, and the teams that are going to be the most scouted and well prepared. That leads to difficulty in the half court generating clean looks. A lot of shots are heavily contested, right? And so having the ability for him to pretty much at any given moment generate a good look for your offense, all whether he makes it or if he just gets a good look and gets it up on the rim and allows for other guys to play off the offensive glass and generate additional points. I mean, that in itself is a skill set. Um, Two, what you're really learning from him is he's kind of tapping into the point where he knows he can get anywhere on the floor and he can get that shot anywhere. And now he's using that to his advantage to almost bait those defenses into sending that second guy. You saw it there late in the game, which really was the nail in the coffin. Point of that game was he drove baseline essentially, and he could have settled for a 15-foot fadeaway and gotten a legitimate look up, but I have a strong feeling he knew he could draw that secondary defender, right? He almost slowed down and waited for that guy to step over to essentially drop it off to Herb just inside of the free throw line, which drew another defender and got Trey Murphy a wide open look. You can almost see it playing out in front of him in slow motion that he was able to do that. So having the ability to, when you do have it going, that you can pick and choose your spots and when you can draw double teams and play into them and almost bait defenses to do it to get certain guys look. Um, is a massive, massive skill. So, um, to me, regardless if you want to argue that he's the most important player, the best player, has the high, like you're talking about two incredibly high level players, right? At that point, the margins are so thin that it's really just personal preference between himself and Zion. Expecting that Zion's going to round back into his true form as he plays in more of these situations. So you can't go wrong with either one of them. But you certainly have to have a lot of respect for Brandon and the impact that he has in those winning situations and in those big games, right? He seems to have all of the characteristics and ability and versatility, more important, that can certainly lead an offense deep into a playoff run.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things you could say about Bi and what he's meant for this team and for this organization. Year after year, and you hit the points on like in these you know needed games. I mean, you can go back to last year or the year before, even that last 10 to 15 games in the regular season when you need those wins to even get to the point of an in season tournament chance. He always performs and always gets on that next level. uh, so that's always been a delight to see, and was really great to see in this opportunity as well. Just want to kind of go back to say Willie Green's performance in this quarterfinals win. Um, what are your thoughts on what he particularly did in this game, and did you see anything that you liked?
Yeah, I think it was certainly a tale of not even two halves, but it was almost two performances. I think Willie was probably early on in that game he could feel the importance and the gravity and the emotion in the building, and that maybe would have led him to make some decisions that, at least myself, right, I had voiced some questions on regarding the rotation, right? We had questioned if the rotation would be slimmed down or we changed or tweaked, and we saw him go to a group of guys that, at least on paper and in terms of skill set and fit, wouldn't probably be your first pick off the bench, right? And I think that's where some of the question marks came, myself included, when looking at a guy like Najee and Jose, coming off the bench essentially. Um, so for that, I'm not gonna hold it to him too much. I understood the thinking that he wanted to go with, two known commodities that have been in bigger games. He knew they were gonna play with a high amount of energy, um, and emotion and physicality, and maybe that rotation or the question of what he wanted to do shifted throughout that first quarter. Right? Maybe he had intentions of going with another group if they got off to a hot start, but knowing that Sacramento came out shooting the ball the way they did, that maybe he reverted to going with those two guys that offered a little bit more physicality and, just they're very blue collar, hard nosed players, right? They generate energy for that team. That's kind of what their role is. So, um, for that one, I'll give him a pass just because I can't confidently answer what the reasoning was. Outside of that, I thought all things together, he did a pretty good job. Considering the situation, he hasn't been in a ton of them with this group of guys before. I think there's certainly room for improvement and maybe shortening up the rotations a little bit, but all things together, I think he did a strong job. He was strong in terms of sticking to guys that had it rolling at the moment. He didn't only stick to his rotation and his allotted amount of minutes that guys typically come in and out of the games. You saw he stuck with groups that really were playing cohesively and were giving the Kings struggle, even to the point where, right, he sat Zion, who didn't have it going for a lot of the night, and was working his way through the situation. Right. I commend Willie. He had the cojones, as one would say, to make a tough call and sit one of his premier players. Um, and to play the group that he thought was playing at the best of the moment. And I commend Zion too, right? Not an easy situation knowing you're on national TV. You have all eyes on you to be sitting there for an extended amount of time, not getting your typical amount of minutes or things of that nature, right? He handled it very well and was mature about it, and I think he understood that sometimes that's just how it's going to go, and guys are going to have it going, and you just got to allow them to kind of work through that and continue playing at that level. And I think both guys did a good job. Um, with that being said, there obviously is room for improvement from Willie's standpoint, and I think this is another good opportunity. Not just for the players, right, to gain this experience in meaningful games. It's a great opportunity for Willie to do that, and to see the guys that he can really trust and lean on. And he's going to have another opportunity against another really good team that's led by two very high level players that are going to put stress on our roster and rotations. That he's going to have to make some changes, right? He's going to really have to make adjustments through this game. Keep LeBron on his heels, right? You can't show LeBron the same coverage possession after possession without thinking that eventually he's going to figure it out and start picking you apart. So he's going to have to be really good, especially on the defensive end, to keep switching things up and keeping things fresh from a defensive scheme perspective. And I think it's a big test for him, and hopefully one that he takes on and ultimately can come out on top and show us that he also is continuing to grow in these big moments.